Hey everyone, welcome in today to our webinar. I'm here with Corey and myself, Anthony, senior analyst here at CyberData Pros, to our tabletop exercise live. And I'm going to hand it over to Corey to do a brief introduction, a little bit about who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we want to wait a couple minutes for everybody to join, so we'll take just a minute here. But CyberData Pros, we're a cybersecurity consulting firm. We specialize in ISO 27001, SOC 2, and internal auditing, lots of different areas. And one of the things we get talked about, or we get asked about a lot, is conducting tabletop exercises. So these are sort of an incident response type of exercise where you're able to really get in and really effectively test your incident response capabilities, your disaster recovery abilities, your business continuity abilities, all these different information security policies that you rely on, and you rely on. But at the end of the day, you have to make sure that this policy that you have in place is actually going to work in case of a real life incident. So what a tabletop is meant to do is sort of simulate that incident. So what we're going to be doing today, and Anthony will be conducting our exercise today, we're going to be going through today is sort of a step-by-step on how we go about conducting a tabletop exercise. And I know we'll probably mention this a few times later on throughout the exercise, but generally speaking, these tabletops can range anywhere from 1 hour all the way to maybe even 3 or 4, depending on the scenario that you choose. And Anthony will go in a little bit more on the details of how to choose a scenario and some of the details like that. But today is going to be a bit of a more of a brief overview of how these function, sort of a basic steps, tips and tricks, rather than a grueling 4-hour a tabletop exercise where we've got a big group of people on. We really wanted to show our clients, or maybe any of those out there, maybe you guys who might be interested in seeing how one's conducting, sort of what it means or how it's effective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great intro here for us to get started. And so with that, brief agenda for today. So we'll start out initially kind of just, defining. I'm sure plenty of you may already know or be well versed on the topic, but for those that aren't, we'll just do a little brief summary and definition of kind of what is a tabletop exercise, and why do we do them? There's purpose behind it, of course, and we want to explore what that is. Then I'll kind of delve into a bit on how to prepare for one. So there's some important considerations, of course, that you want to make leading up to it, and it's and to get the real value out of it, it's not just done on a whim and
Right.
without any sort of preparation.
Sure.
And so following that, that's when we'll actually dive in and walk through a live demo of an actual exercise and how one might be conducted, and a little brevity, of course, for given the circumstances. But we think it'll give you a good picture of what a real one is supposed to look like there.
Yeah, and fair warning. Being a brief version of this exercise or not, I am a bit of a competitive person, so I'm really hoping my roles go the way I want to today. Or I don't want to get too upset on camera in front of everybody.
Speaking of roles, why don't you go ahead and let everyone know that we'll be injecting some variables so they know what the roles are.
Yeah, sure. So the way our roles are going to work, or the way sort of a unique take we really like to use on a tabletop exercise, again, or sort of a incident injection or a role. So we use a die just like this. This is a 12-sided die that gives you a high, medium, and a low. Or you can also do high, low with this range. What that is during the incident, as we go through, you can very much think of this as a game of Dungeons and Dragons, where we have our dungeon master, or Anthony, who will be conducting the exercise, and me, the meager player, who is the pawn in his scheme. And he's essentially, he already has a scenario that's completely mapped out with details, different stories and different points and different branches. And this die is going to choose essentially what succeeds and what fails at different points as I go through this exercise and figure it out. Now, I don't have any previous knowledge to the exact scenario he has. So when he comes up on these rolls, I'm not going to know what the potential outcomes are or what I'm even going to be rolling for. I'm just going to be going through this scenario.
Yeah, that's definitely good. outline there of the explanation. I think the point, of course, is that with these, you don't want them to be scripted to where everyone already knows what they're going to say. The whole point of practicing these is to see how you respond in high stress situation with changing variables, different factors coming into play. And so that's when we say roles, that's how we do that. We think it's a creative way to really show that. So following the live exercise, we'll then wrap up with a brief little summary. And then depending on how much time we have, we will allow for some questions and try to get some answers if anything comes up from the audience. So starting out, what is a tabletop exercise? So again, this is, some may already be well aware, but we'll kind of just delve into it a little bit for those that aren't. So in cybersecurity realms, tabletop exercise is going to be a fictional event. It's a simulated exercise where the various participants that are involved, and we'll get more into who those might be in a bit, gather in a room and meet in a controlled environment. So oftentimes, just as we are here, we're around a conference table, hence the term tabletop. And you essentially are going to walk through this simulated event as if it was a real incident, and talk through, the steps that you would take in response. And this allows you to kind of do a dry run through a real scenario. And so kind of mentioned before briefly as well that, to get the most value from these, of course, you want to be sure that there's some structure in place already in terms of, a plan or procedures or playbooks. It won't do a whole lot of good if everything is just, if everyone's just winging it. And there's not any sort of, defined steps to take. So something like making sure, an incident response plan, if you don't already have one, we'd highly recommend writing and implementing one of those before conducting one of these, because that'll kind of serve as like the blueprint of how you would go about this.
And as you mentioned earlier too, the playbooks is a good point to mention as well. Even if maybe in your specific organization, maybe it's 10 people or less, these huge plans may be kind of a lift. Even just having a playbook of some basic or potentially common scenarios like a ransomware or an infiltration on the Wi-Fi network. Some at least basic steps that outline a few different scenarios, so people aren't just completely in the dark if something happens. Could be a good stopgap as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. That would be a huge lift off of, in that wartime setting where every second, every minute counts to have some of that preparation.
And it does.
Yeah. And so in terms of format structure, typically a tabletop will be led by one, maybe more facilitators that kind of, lead the discussion, lead the exercise. Think of them as the host or the moderator of the discussion. So they're the ones who will introduce the scenario to all the participants, inject these variables through roles such that we mentioned earlier, or however they may choose. But they're the ones leading the charge, and should be the only ones that really know the circumstances of the scenario. For everyone else, it's really meant to be a spontaneous discussion of sorts, and so there isn't a lot of planning and preparedness in terms of scripting of oh, I know what I'm going to say. And so with that, in today's role, I'll be serving in that role, and Corey will be the participant. And so before we get into those specifics, a few benefits of what or why we should conduct tabletop exercises. There isn't a cut and dry list, but there's a lot of reasons that we've been able to come up with in talking about it of why should an organization spend the time and the resources on conducting one of these. It can be a fun way to break up the monotony of sitting at the desk all day and kind of role playing through a scenario here.
Fun as long as the roles are going your way. They can get frustrating quick.
Sure, absolutely. So to kind of just run through, we picked out a few here in our discussions, and some reasons that we deem important for conducting these would be things like one of the biggest is, of course, identifying weaknesses. Finding out where gaps are. If there's a missing piece to this process of how you're going to respond to an incident. Maybe there's a tool that you just don't have and didn't realize it, or a process or a procedure that's completely missing. Or maybe certain staff or departments are not meeting the expectation that their loop in the chain.
Yeah, it's very easy to find weak links in like you said, these wartime scenarios. So going through these and practicing those, it's best to find those weak links before actual crisis time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Proactivity is the
Always,
key here.
Always protect. Yeah.
And of course, it's good to know your strengths as well. And so don't want to forget that, to kind of highlight areas that went well. It also provides the benefit of being able to evaluate your incident preparedness. So let's say, assuming you do have your incident response plan or disaster recovery, these sorts of procedures in place, evaluating how effective those are. Are they just, words on a page, or are they something that is actionable and, can actually be followed in a real situation?
Right. Kind of like I had mentioned before, having an incident response plan, having disaster recovery, all these plans in place are all well and good, but if you don't even know if you'd be able to utilize them in such a situation, they're not doing a whole lot of good. At that point, they just become another variable, almost like another obstacle.
Yeah.
When you're actually in a panic situation.
Great point. Yeah. Assessing communication channels, of course, how the different parties are communicating, different departments. This can be a big thing if you're spread out. You have multiple locations or offices. If you're remote, hybrid, it's not always going to be as simple as verbally speaking in the same room. When a incident or an emergency strikes, you could be anywhere. As well as testing and validating these plans, like we mentioned, and how you'd respond, increasing awareness and understanding of threats, really taking into account feasible, and realistic threats that they might arise, and kind of getting people to buy in and think about things that maybe, I've never thought about. What would we do if this occurred, if we got hit by ransomware, or we have physical servers that were wiped out by a natural disaster, as well as clarifying team member roles and responsibilities. There's no room for a single person to be the one to handle everything in response to an incident, security incident. So,
there's just no way. It's very unlikely any organization of any size is going to have one person that can make decisions for IT, HR, legal, PR, all these kind of things. So having a team and making sure that team all understands their roles and duty is critical.
Yeah, it's good for efficiency, and as well as you don't want to have everyone jumping on toes, or not knowing who needs to do this, who contacts that person, who shuts down this application, who figuring that out on the fly doesn't do anyone any good.
Yeah, every moment's precious in these. It's got to be efficient.
Yeah. Of course, the scenario also allows you to practice decision making under stress, under pressure, practicing as if it were a real incident. And with that couples is also training and awareness. It gives staff the ability to kind of practice their skills and increase their knowledge on situations like these.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the last couple here we have as well is improving the speed of incident response. This plays into closely related to something we'll get into in a moment about the choosing the right scenario. But when you practice things that could actually befall your organization, naturally it allows you to get better at preparing. And so, if you've practiced for a ransomware situation, and you've got that ironed out, should you get hit with real ransomware, hopefully that response time is going to be quicker because you've kind of ran through that and practiced that scenario already.
Right. And we're not trying to say that practicing a ransomware scenario is going to make you perfect at responding to every single one. There's always going to be details that are different, but all of the things that are common or all the necessary steps are going to come so much smoother. So even if you don't have the exact same response you practiced before, you're definitely going to be able to reduce that response time very significantly by conducting these.
Definitely. And then lastly, enhancing your overall cybersecurity posture and resilience. I think that's kind of the high level overarching goal here is, of course, to strengthen your business, shore up your defenses, be better prepared, because today, and increasingly so as time goes on, it's just going to continue to become, even a bigger threat than it already is.
Oh yeah.
Cyber threats are not going anywhere; they're here to stay. And so, doing anything in your power. This is just, of course, one step of building out a strong cyber posture, but it's an important one.
Very, yeah.
And so, to kind of kick us off before we go into the live demo here, we've summed up in broad terms kind of a few steps of how to properly prepare and really make sure that you get the most out of the exercise. If you're going to devote, again, the time and the resources, you want to make sure it's valuable.
Absolutely.
And so the first step is to identify clear objectives for the exercise. You want to go into it, having a reason, having a why as to conducting it. What is the purpose of this? And so that understanding by the team of the aim going in,
Right.
the facilitators, what the goal is really.
Right. So we're here to test, objectives. We're here to test our incident response plan or what have it. But what specifically within that are we really looking to dig into? You can't just say, oh, we're testing our incident response. Incident response is 1,000 different steps. So each one of these, we want to make sure, like you said, we have specific objectives that we're working toward. What, in this scenario, rather than another, how are we picking a specific aspect of our incident response that we're really, really trying to test, not just all of it, because we need to make sure all the details are in place for each one.
Yep. Yeah. Definitely having a guiding focus as you conduct it. These there's key areas to focus in, take into account recent trends in cybersecurity. If there's an outbreak of a new malware strain that's been, hitting all over the place, and there's a reasonable likelihood it could come for you next.
Yeah.
Organizational priorities, the type of business that you're in, what your mission is, the industries you're involved with, and then also known weaknesses. So maybe you already have an idea of certain areas that you think, probably aren't as strong as you'd like them to be. You can put it under this sort of stress test, if you will, and see how it holds up. And so, just making sure that you're aligning the objectives with the business goals. One thought could even be considering, I'm sure many of you have heard of those SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So, again, like Corey mentioned, so rather than just a vague, goal here, kind of setting more particular why behind.
Yeah, be specifics on what steps or what aspects of your incident response you're trying to improve each time.
And then secondly, of course, organizing the participant list. So not the entire directory of staff needs to attend this meeting, but you do want to make sure that the people that should be present and would be present in a real event are in this situation. So, this is going to vary a lot depending on different factors, but there's not a one size fits all, as it says here. Whether you're a small, medium business to a large enterprise, the value in the exercise is the same, but the details and the specifics of it are going to change. And so who's required for what, again, will change from time to time. And
that's a good point there too, is using that word required as well. Because like you said, we don't want to invite the entire Active Directory of the company to a meeting. The more people that are in this meeting or at this table, the longer it's going to take, the more complex things can be, the more muddy the waters are. So it is definitely best practice to make sure it's, deciding who is required and who is actually required, not just who would be good. We want to make sure that the operation stays lean and, again, effective and efficient.
Yeah, definitely. So the focus here, the main area is to make sure that the relevant parties are represented. And you want to condense that to what you can, and
Yeah.
not over invite, if you will.
Yeah. It's all about the context of your organization.
Right. And so some good examples, again, these aren't going to be uniform for everyone, but things to consider would be executive leadership, legal compliance, IT security, your communications, and PR staff, for press, dealings with the press,
Mhm.
HR, human resources,
Yep.
any department heads for any relevant departments that, within the organization, supervisors, that sort of thing, and of course operations, to name some of the more common ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, having representation, at least some sort of lead representation for really most divisions, especially if they're going to be affected, is going to be pretty important.
Thirdly, we have here develop a relevant and realistic scenario. So we kind of touched on this previously, but yet while the incident is fictional, of course, we're acting here, right? We're pretending, but we want to make sure that it's real enough that the people that are participating are able to buy in.
Mhm.
And if it's just outrageous, like unrealistic type situation that just doesn't make any sense, and it's going to be viewed as more of a joke than something that could happen tomorrow. It really will take away the value of that.
We don't want to start incident response to the alien invasion of our cloud system. So we're not super worried about that. So yeah, bring it down to earth and make sure it's something practical for the organization.
Good point there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. That feasibility and practicality are huge here.
Mm-hmm.
Again, your aim is to get meaningful input from staff. So you want them to take it seriously. It's fine to be lighthearted, and there may be some jokes thrown in throughout. Right. But of course, you do want to. There is a reason, and so coming up with that situation that works for your organization makes sense. It makes all the difference.
Absolutely.
Lastly, we have, of course, have a plan in place for after the fact. Once the conversation's over, you don't want to, close the book and that's it, and nothing is gained out of it other than a fun hour of conversation. So you should plan for things like having before all the participants are dismissed, like a quick little debrief while it's still fresh in everyone's mind, the details, and gather any sort of feedback or insights or clarifications. Maybe someone said something that was misunderstood during the scenario. It's good to get everyone's thoughts while it's still fresh on the mind.
Thoughts, and having some action item takeaways as well.
Yeah.
So these kind of exercises can pretty easily and are designed to identify weaknesses and gaps and flaws and processes as well. So when you identify some of those weaknesses, it's important that, like I said, during our debrief, we're identifying those and labeling those as action items for after this meeting. So like you said, it continues and there's something gained.
Yeah, something tangible. And so with that, throughout the process, of course, there should be detailed notes being taken of the entire process, the whole scenario, and that'll be used to kind of get to the real deliverable, I guess, out of this. You would say that formal document or report. You might have heard of it being referred to as things such as a after action report or a lessons learned report, incident summary report. Call it what you will, but there should be some written documentation that really dissects, if you will, this. And so with that, you'll want to also include in that report, like you said, those action items where you're assigning those areas that have been identified for improvement.
Absolutely.
To act upon those. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get right into the scenario if you're ready, Corey.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very interested to see what you got cooked up this time. Usually got some pretty good scenarios for me.
Great. All right. So to introduce our scenario here, so first off, we want to go ahead and identify the objectives of kind of what the aim is here. And so there's multiple here that we want to issue before we explain. Before I tell you the details here,
Right.
What we're looking to do is to test the adequacy of our current backup procedures.
Okay.
That's always an important one.
It's gonna be a big one then.
Yep.
All right.
We're going to want to test and establish and test our crisis communication channels.
Okay.
Make sure that those are good.
Okay.
Practice our team coordination during an incident response across departments, internal, external, and then of course incident reporting, response documentation. Make sure that all that is ironed out. And then finally, to assess specifically, and this will give you a little hint here, but how we're going to respond to ransomware.
Oh man, how do I know you're going to put me on ransomware during a live tabletop? Okay.
Yeah,
I'm ready.
There's a lot of ways you could go with this, but this is definitely one that is very common.
Yeah.
And for that
reason,
it provides a lot of value because there is a good chance of this actually happening.
Yeah, so, no, yeah, absolutely. Ransomware is, in my opinion, a matter of when, not if. Yep. At least it should be dealt with that way, I think.
Absolutely.
All right, awesome.
And so for the purposes of this demo, of course, for time's sake, being a webinar and whatnot, we're not going to actually have the multiple different positions here filling in. So so Corey's kind of going to fill in, for multiple areas of staff here but for the sake of the exercise, the important parties that we want to include in this tabletop exercise, we want to have our head of IT, we want to have our head of HR, our CISO should be there as well. Lead production engineer is going to be present.
Okay, so that gives me another hint.
Yep.
That has something to do with our company software. Okay.
Yep. And then last but not least, legal. Our counsel.
Okay.
We want to be sure that if we're depending on the scenario that plays out, legal is always going to be, in most instances, one that should be included.
Absolutely.
And so, with those couple of preparation steps out of the way, the actual scenario details itself. So again, just to kind of note here that this is a live demo, so some of this will kind of be breezed through for the sake of time. We won't dig too deep into like technical details or anything like that. And we've previously been able to run through similar scenarios as this, and so that'll kind of cut back on some of the nitty gritty that, again, in a real live tabletop, you should spend a lot of time discussing as a group.
Very technical details, yeah, and sort of go on what he was mentioning is, like I said, we've run through a lot of these tabletops and these exercises before. So we're sort of doing this under the context of our Acme corporation. So Acme is a corporation that we've sort of built and designed from the ground up on paper just for these exercises. So in this way, we're able to get through it quickly because in our previous attempts, we've been able to establish what our cloud environment looks like, what our office environment looks like, a lot of the details of the security. So rather than those being variables and us spending 4 hours, we're using this already known element. So there's a few less details I have to try to get from him.
Yeah.
Whereas if this was a brand new scenario with a brand new client, we'd be asking a lot more details or having a lot more time spent on, exactly how is this configured? Exactly, how are your passwords managed here? Who's in charge of this? But this way we're using sort of a known entity to help us get through.
Yep. Great. So we're going to go ahead and dive in then.
Here we go.
For our scenario here, it's about 3 a.m., middle of the night, of course, because that's when these things like to happen.
They always do.
The customer support has received a ticket from a client notifying them that they're not able to access their application environment.
Okay.
Yeah. Further details in the ticket stated that when they do try to access that application in the browser, there is a pop-up of sorts, a warning kind of, notifying that there's presence of ransomware.
Oh boy.
And demanding a ransom of roughly 4 Bitcoin, which is about $100,000. Currently, by the end of this call, it may be different, but we know how fluid that is. Either way, it's a significant amount of money.
Yeah, that's not nothing. That's for sure.
Right.
Really got me on the hook. Okay.
And with the expectation that they are asking for this ransom in exchange for the decryption key.
Right. So it sounds like our actual hosted like AWS instance that hosts our application has been hit. Okay.
Yep. And so our current state of things, a few details to add to this. So again, cannot access the web application, customer data, databases. These are going to be, all affected to make your job a little harder here.
So it's pretty widespread, it sounds like, for them.
It definitely appears that way in the information that we have. One key point of that is a good thing is you do still have access to the AWS management console.
Oh,
so,
okay.
The application is hosted in AWS, and you do still have access to that dashboard.
Interesting. I appreciate that bone being thrown my way. All right, awesome. Thank you. That's good.
Yep. But that said, we are considering this kind of a full service outage because again, our clients rely on our application, in the conducting of their business.
Okay.
And so we're going to go ahead and assume that all customer environments are affected because we're getting calls from, further calls from different clients of ours as well. It's not just one ticket that was submitted. We're now getting more and more that are continuing to come in and bombard our support team.
All right. So all customers and clients are already pretty well aware. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. So that's kind of our intro scenario. We'll be throwing in a few things as we go.
Sure.
But to kind of kick to the next phase of preparation here, what are some kind of first initial steps given this information that you would take?
Right. Okay. So preparation step is going to be pretty important for me in this scenario, especially being just me. So I need to make sure that I'm asking all the questions and getting all the relevant information or making these things known beforehand. Because if I don't now, I might regret it later. So I've got to make sure I get all my details. So obviously we need to make sure we're gathering our relevant parties. So I'm going to have my head of IT, HR, legal, as well as apparently my application engineer. Sounds like they're going to be very useful. So I'm going to have my entire team here. I'm going to need to establish communication channels. That's going to be important. So we've previously established a secured separate Slack channel organization. So we're probably going to have to invoke and use that for communication with employees, as well as potentially assemble the team. We're going to be using our Gmail confidential mode for any outside communications where necessary. As far as gathering for the preparation, we're definitely going to have to gather logs. So if we're hit with ransomware in AWS, I'm going to make sure head of IT or all our IT department is gathering as many logs and the information that's available as possible. We'll make sure to have that here with us in the room. And I'm going to make sure I'm going to have HR as well as our legal gather any of our information security policies and recovery plans. So since I mentioned it here, I'm going to have access to our incident response plan, disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans, data handling procedures, retention. I'm going to have access to all of that, which will definitely be needed. So I mentioned the Slack channel. Oh, right. Because I know you'll do this to me. In case we're not able to meet personally, we are going to use our secured Zoom channel as well. So it won't just be a standard Zoom call. This will be an encrypted set with a key that's set out through Google Confidential.
Awesome. Those are all great steps, laying out that kind of groundwork to build upon and tackle this. So,
Hope so.
With that, moving on to the detection and analysis phase. And so this is generally where a lot of time is spent of, we've got to figure out what exactly is happening here, what we're looking at, figuring out what all the pieces are in play.
Always takes the longest for sure.
Yep. And so with that, kind of what
See, so if we're getting into it now, first part of detection is going to be alerts. All right. So what alerts have I been able to receive? What do we know from our alerts?
Great question. So for the alerts, there are some configured in AWS. So from that angle, on the surface, it would appear that we've got that. However, these alerts were set to fire for non-whitelisted IP address.
Right.
So any logins attempted.
Do we get any logins? Do we get any alerts attempted from any non-whitelisted IPs?
We did not.
That's not good. All right. Did we get alerts from CPU usage or any system usage alerts?
Also, no. We did have some configured, but during this incident, it doesn't appear that any of them were triggered.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to make a note that'll be a takeaway as well. So one of our first takeaways, action items, like we mentioned earlier, is going to be configuring those alerts. If we got hit with some sort of ransomware, we definitely should have been able to hit an alert there. So I'm going to make sure after this that we assess our alert configuration throughout the environment and make sure that every part along that login chain is covered when it comes to the system usage, because that would be really helpful to know sort of, again, so when it hit, we got alerted, they said at 3 a.m. sounds like, but getting those alerts beforehand, we probably could have cut some of that off. So if we don't have any alerts, I have to try to figure out where that compromise came from. So figure out where it came from. Am I able to glean any information as far as where the initial attack vector was?
Let's find out. Why don't you give this dice
make me roll for this one?
Let's see what we come up with.
Oh man. Okay. So when it comes to these rolls, so here's a good example. When I use D&D, this is a 12-sided die. So is this going to be a success fail, or is this going to be a 3-tier?
We're going to do a 3-tier here.
3-tier.
So
okay.
There'll be a success, which is of course best case scenario for you.
It's my high roll. Okay.
Yep. There'll be a partial, which is where you'll be given some information, but not all the keys to the kingdom.
Sure. So that'll be my mid roll.
Yep. And then the lower roll would be more or less the failure for you in terms of how much information I'm going to give you at this point.
Yeah. So I can't figure out a point of ingress, or at least identify the initial point of compromise. It's going to be rough. Okay. Here we go. And my first roll. 6. Okay. That's a mid roll. I'll take a 6. I'm okay with that.
That's a nice middle ground there.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, this partial we'll go with.
Okay.
So you were able to identify through some analysis of logs through the console that the machine that was compromised. So we were able to pinpoint that.
Awesome.
And that machine is the one that was used to infiltrate this AWS environment.
So it was an actual machine that wasn't part of AWS. So there was an external machine that was accessed.
Yep, exactly.
The plot thickens. All right.
Yep. And so with that said, again, this being a partial roll, we were not able, however, to identify that point of ingress into the AWS environment. So we've got the source machine.
We don't know how that machine was compromised.
We don't know what door they walked through. Yeah.
Okay, so if I know there's an external machine that's been compromised, I don't know how that machine was compromised. Do I know who compromised it or whereabouts? Like, do I have any IP addresses or anything from that hacker to identify where he came from?
So at this point, no.
Okay. Dang. All right. That is a bummer. All right. Well, so we've identified a machine. We'll have to take that offline. That's going to be step number 1. Do we have any communications from the attacker?
Yeah, we do not have any sort of further communication, any open line of communication for us to
Mhm.
reach out to them
Mhm.
since just that initial ransom demand.
Gotcha. So so that machine's been taken offline. Don't have any current communications. We know AWS has been compromised. Do we know? Oh, okay. So I had access to logs at one point. You mentioned we found that through the logs. In those logs, are we able to identify any data exfiltration? Because remediation is, I mean, fixing the problem and all that is one thing, but sort of knowing your responsibilities is going to be a big part of this. So was I able
Yeah.
to identify any data exfiltration?
Great question. In this case, yes.
Crap.
We were able to identify some, let's say 50 gigabytes roughly worth
Whoa.
of data
Okay.
is determined to have been exfiltrated
Mhm.
from the environment
Mm.
out of that VPC. Again, it doesn't, we don't know at this point the specifics of the data or what it is.
Mhm.
But I wonder, you might be able to assume or any
Yeah, so with that amount of data, it's unlikely that's going to be, or there's no way that's going to be just like configurations or basic keys and stuff like that. If we're talking about data in the gigabytes and it's affected our VPC for our application, that application is going to hold client databases, customer databases as well. So at this point, we're going to have to assume that customer data has been exfiltrated, otherwise affected, which is a bummer. Let's see if we're working on that. See, I got to figure out where to move now that we've got customer data on the line. Obviously, figuring out when the exfiltration of that machine is going to be a big thing. But yeah, moving forward, we're gonna have to figure out a communication plan based on that. Based on the fact that data's been exfiltrated.
Yep, definitely.
Mhm.
And so with that, why don't we go ahead and throw another factor in here?
Oh, good.
And see, what if you got. Now we're going to have some contact from the attacker.
Oh,
so
okay.
there is a new development
Okay.
there.
Okay. Okay.
But it's up to you to kind of figure out if it's going to be good news or bad news.
All right. So is this going to be just a yes or no, good or bad? Okay.
Yep, this will be a
Higher or
one or
low?
the other, high or low.
I need good news. I need good news. And a 2. That is not going to help me. All right.
Right. So negative news here. So the attacker has reached out,
Mhm.
and he's informed you that if you attempt to restore the environment from a backup,
Mhm.
there are means in place. Again, we don't know how deep this goes, but in
Mhm.
terms of their access and monitoring, but
Mhm.
they are going to be able to deduce if this is attempted, and should you attempt to restore from backup, they're
Mhm.
going to double that ransom payment to about $200,000 or 8 Bitcoin roughly.
Gotcha. Wow. 8 Bitcoin. Okay. All right. So sounds like the hacker hasn't identified himself through the communications. Were we able to identify the ransomware? Now you mentioned that there was a pop-up received by the customers. Are we able to identify what the ransomware is or anything about the group from that?
Good question. I think I'll give this one to you.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
so with that, we were able to, we don't have a specific attacker, but we were able to determine that the ransomware that was used is going to be Conti, which based on our,
Interesting.
threat intelligence and other
Uh-huh.
factors, as as a type of ransomware that's often used and linked to a Russian-based organization that
Mhm.
their model kind of is ransomware as a service that they offer, and so
Oh.
we've been able to determine that, but
Mhm.
again, with ransomware as a service, we don't know who hired
We
them.
still don't have the identity. All right. Well, see, that's actually really good information. So in this case, one thing, again, if we had multiple people here, this is something that I'm sure IT would pick up on, is the fact that with ransomware as a service, that means the person who's actually posing the ransom is not the is not the one who's actually done the infiltration, who's actually that put out that malware, that ransomware. So that gives me a lot of information. And the second bit of information you gave me, and you may have given me too much on accident, or maybe I'm just too clever for you, I'm not sure. But you mentioned that we're still able to access our AWS environment. But it just seems to be that the VPC that hosts our applications as well as customer databases has been taken over. So far, we've got a single point of ingress. So we are identifying a single machine. So far, it seems like that single VPC now do we have any other indicators of compromise anywhere else in the network? So internally, I would assume we still have access to logs. Definitely been monitoring those. Has there been any internal logging that showed additional access, or has there been any other logs that we're able to access from AWS that shows horizontal movement through the system?
At this point, no. The attacker, we don't have any indication that they've been able to move laterally throughout the environment, to intrude in through any other VPCs,
right?
Anything like that.
Gotcha. All right, that is really good information. So they contacted us saying if we attempt to restore from a backup, they're going to double the ransom.
Yep.
And that's their first contact. To me, that sounds a little desperate. That sounds a little itchy. It sounds like they want their money pretty fast. And it also sounds like they know we have backups.
Fair points.
If I take that and combine it with the fact that they're using ransomware as a service, I would venture to say that these attackers are probably not as complex as they want me to believe. So I'm gonna consider their threats probably not that serious. So I'm gonna continue moving on without considering that communication from the attacker. Obviously, we're not going to underestimate them. Obviously, but everything you've said so far points to the fact that this is essentially a job for hire, and the people who actually did the attack aren't really interested in doing any of this. So now I think I need to start assessing the outage. So costs are probably the next thing you're going to want to know about.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we've talked specifically the dollar amount of the ransom, but of course there's a lot of other things to consider here. What are some other costs that would come into play that you might want to consider or should consider? Right.
So obviously, service outage is a huge one. There's going to be costs incurred from lost productivity. Not just everybody in the room, but we're going to have our IT team on this. Customer support, I'm sure, is getting overwhelmed at this point. If we already have clients who are aware and contacting us, customer support's going to be pretty backed up. We're going to have to increase the customer support staff a little bit, at least temporarily. We're bringing legal in on this, so there's going to be, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the legal fees and lawyers' fees. They love to have those. Never cheap. Man, that $100,000 is starting to look pretty good once you bring that picture, but no, we're not going to do it. And I guess if the entire environment's down, we're going to have to worry about potentially reimbursing customers when it comes to potential service outage for like SLAs and stuff like that. So we're going to have to look at that.
Yeah, those are all good points to bring up there. It's not going to be as clear cut as it seems, and there's a lot of things that can come up that are a little outside the box here. So with that, how would we go about communicating? How would you go about communicating to our partners, customers, any sort of communication about this?
Yes. So I mentioned our communication channels beginning. So I got that one covered. We got confidential email for our customers and partners. For partners, we're going to notify them of the breach specifically, so that way they can keep a lookout and look for any other contact from the hacker. So that'd be a good one. Customers, we're going to notify of the service outage. Our SLAs, I believe, are 12 hours set for this. So up until that point, we're just going to notify them of the outage. If we're able to resolve this before that 12-hour mark, or once we reach that 12-hour mark, we will inform them of a breach. I'm going to have HR and legal on that one in charge of that email. I know we have templates we work from as well, so they're going to be able to put that together and get that sent out.
Good points. We do have a question here actually to throw in.
Okay.
On this topic. One question that's been brought up is, have you checked the cybersecurity insurance limits to determine if you should reach out to them?
So in this case, specifically with Acme Corporation, we do not have cybersecurity insurance, which is a real bummer. Because yes, in that scenario, as soon as we had a ransom number or contact with that hacker talking about the amounts, the security insurance company should be number one on our contact list. So that would have been on my preparations. Unfortunately, for the sake of this exercise, or for sake of Acme, who we use for these exercises, we do not have cyber insurance.
But hey, that's a great takeaway from this.
Yeah, yeah,
100%. An action item to follow up on.
Yep, that would definitely be an action item for us to consider. That's a big takeaway.
So we'll move into the containment and eradication here. At this point, we've got all this information so far, but we haven't formally declared a disaster as of yet. Would you choose to activate the disaster recovery?
In this scenario, yes, I would. I'm not going to at this moment, since we are going to be strapped for time for this example. But in another scenario where we have a nice 2-3 long hour call, I would absolutely invoke the disaster recovery, as well as certain aspects of our business continuity, as far as maybe like failovers and things like that about returning service soon. But in this case, for brevity's sake, I won't be doing that.
Makes sense. Okay. So one thing that's kind of brought up a lot is RTO, recovery time objective.
Right.
And so with that, we're kind of measuring, in advance, of course, and you're planning. What is that time frame there of, how quickly after an incident like this or an outage of some sort to get, things up and running again and restore?
Right. So in this case, with Acme, I know our SLAs govern a 12-hour recovery time. So we're gonna set that as our RTO for this instance, which it's a little aggressive for ransomware, especially something that's taken over an entire VPC. We've tested backups in past engagements, so I know restoring certain databases or certain portions of that in the past has taken about 4 to 6 hours. In this case, though, we've never had to rebuild an entire VPC before, which hopefully no other twists come up and we move laterally. But if we're going to have to reconstruct that VPC, it's going to be a tight deadline. But I do know we do utilize infrastructure as code, which is good. So if that's necessary, we do at least have that stopgap in place to make sure that it's not going to be some massive, all hands on trying to rebuild this. So using infrastructure as code, it shouldn't be impossible. I'll put it that way.
Okay, that makes sense. And so in terms of paying this ransom, like what are some considerations you might take? I mean, it in some ways people might think, well, we're a larger company, and in some instances, $100,000 might be worth it, but it's oftentimes not as simple as just pay it. And what are some things you should consider when thinking about that?
Right. So when we heard from the attacker, he talked about doubling the ransom and all that. I kind of put together a bunch of pieces that you left dangling for me. So first thing I'm considering is I don't think the attacker is going to be able to act on his threats. I think we've got an unskilled attacker using a service. Secondly, I think our costs of recovery are going to be, or our attempted costs of recovery are going to be low enough to where that ransom amount is just completely unreasonable for us. Not to mention, especially considering this is ransomware as a service, I don't necessarily trust that the attacker is going to make good. If I'm being fully honest, I know you, and I know the way you run these tabletops. I don't think paying that ransom is going to get us where we're going to go. Even outside of exercises, statistically speaking, you've only got like 40-50% chance of the attacker actually making good on it. And for that amount of money, compiled with our recovery cost, I don't think we're going to be considering pretty much in any aspect the idea of paying that ransom.
Yeah, that's a good point there. There's definitely no purchase protection on paying that ransom that's going to give your money back if they don't deliver those goods or service. So,
No, and
no
as we
guarantee.
mentioned, it sounds like the attacker also knows we have backups. So we do have backups in duplicate for this organization as well. One on backups on AWS as well as backups on local.
Yeah. So we'll throw in another quick roll here.
Mhm.
And so we're going to attempt to kind of assess the integrity of the backups.
Right. Okay. So hopefully they didn't get to him. Is this going to be a pass, fail, or is this going to be a 3-tier?
Let's do a 3 again. A 3-tier
Okay.
success, partial, or failure.
Okay. Mid roll again. That's not great, but I'll take it. All right.
Sounds better than nothing.
Yeah.
So with this, we were able to identify successfully that the AWS backups are unaltered. They are still maintaining the same integrity, and so they are safe to use.
Okay. So the AWS ones, but it sounds like our local backups are not. If from the way you're implying, if this is a partial, it sounds like not necessarily both of our backups are going to be viable.
Gotcha. Yep, that's correct.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So I'll have to think, if we're going to try to restore from backups, we're going to need a team to do it. So I'm going to have to think about who that's going to require. So currently it sounds like, since we've got our infrastructure as code, we're going to need to rebuild the VPC. That can be fairly automated. So I'm only going to need one person for that. I'm thinking most of the people I'm going to need are going to be from monitoring. So I want at least 3 people monitoring every point. So I'm going to have 3 people for monitoring, 1 person rebuilding the VPC, and 1 person continuing to monitor specifically those backups that we have.
Great points. What about any law enforcement involvement? Any
right.
plan there?
I hadn't, unfortunately. So I'm thinking we'll probably talk to local law enforcement, let them know that there's a situation, and essentially just ask how they want us to respond. Local law enforcement get different places. I don't think we're going to need to include like FBI or anybody bigger than that. It seems relatively contained, and it doesn't sound like we have some sort of nation state act or anything like that. So probably just local police.
Makes sense to me.
So now that I've talked to police, we've got someone verifying our backups. We've got someone monitoring. I guess in this case, I'm going to attempt the backup.
We'll attempt. Let's find out if it's successful or not.
All right. So 3-tier or just success fail?
This is going to be a heads or tails type of situation.
Don't like those 50-50 odds. Finally, I got to roll my way. Thank you.
Got lucky this time.
Yeah, very, actually, because I knew you had some pain ready for me. All right. So high roll. So I'm guessing my backup was successful.
Absolutely. It sure was.
Nice. All right. Sweet. So if backups are successful, we've identified the machine that was the point of ingress. I guess now that would be considered, we've taken it offline. So I think I did it, right?
I think so.
Yeah. All right.
I think that about wraps up the scenario here.
All right. Sweet.
So we're just about at time here. So to kind of run through quickly, just a couple of the post-incident activities that we want to follow up on this exercise with.
So in this case, I would look at filling out my incident report. Firstly, because there's a lot of takeaways from this. I would follow up with law enforcement, let them know that we've remedied the situation, but we want to make sure we're communicating with them, giving them any information they need. Obviously, investigating that compromised machine is going to be huge. Taking it offline, we're going to image it. We're going to store that image somewhere securely, and we're going to use software to actually dive into that as well. As far as takeaways, we mentioned we want to look at those alert configurations. That one's going to be huge. We need to do access reviews, because if that local machine was compromised, we're going to figure out how. Access reviews and reviewing those logs are probably going to be our our best option to trying to find that. So
Yep.
those are probably going to be my takeaway actions.
Yep. And definitely want to get a response to, evaluate how our objectives fared,
Right.
how we acted on those.
Yeah. And I feel like we did pretty good hitting
Yep.
those.
So just want to not forget those as you fill out your report, and in your own tabletop exercises. We did have another question here.
Yeah.
Should you be providing hourly updates to employees / customers along the way?
That's a very, very good question. So a lot of that is going to depend on, again, SLAs, the expected communication. So oversharing information is a thing when it comes to crisis times and its response times. You have to be confident that A, your channels of communications are secure, and B, that you're not going to be potentially giving away more information if other parties are going to be affected. So you definitely want to have open lines of communications with employees. Like I said, we had that secure Slack channel. Definitely want open communication with your partners. Hourly updates could be a little bit of an extra lift. So I would say hourly updates, depending on the situation, of course, could be a bit of a barrier. But yes, consistent communication with partners and employees is definitely be a critical aspect.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So that about wraps up our tabletop
Awesome.
here. Again, in a real scenario that you're working through, it's probably going to be a lot more detailed and involved, and won't be able to be done in a matter of 30 minutes to 60 minutes.
Very brief.
And so, but hopefully that definitely gave you an idea, a picture of how one of these might be conducted, and what can be gained from it. Again, the following up at the end is just making those improvements, seeing how those objectives fared, what areas you can revise and change in your processes and procedures, or your staff and your resources, and really improve from there. So if there's not any other questions, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks everyone for joining us. We really appreciate you being here and taking part in this exercise with us, answering some great questions. I'm sure there's plenty of questions that you don't have answered just from this exercise. Please feel free to reach out to us at cyberdatapros.com. We have an inquiry form you can fill out. We've got tons of resources for you to look at, and kind of more examples to look at as well. If there's anything you feel your organization might need help on, or you feel like there's anything we touched on that maybe your organization isn't prepared for, that's what we do. We're here to help. So definitely go on our website, again, cyberdatapros.com. Fill out that inquiry form, and we'll have an analyst get right back with you and see if there's a way that we can help you better prepare for scenarios just like this.
Well said. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.